Keanu Reeves sat quietly in a Los Angeles McDonald's, savoring a rare moment of simplicity in his otherwise fast-paced life. Earlier that day, he had spent hours at a charity event dedicated to supporting underprivileged children, an effort that resonated deeply with him. The event had left him physically tired but emotionally fulfilled, his heart warmed by the genuine smiles of the children he had met. Instead of heading home to unwind or choosing an upscale restaurant for dinner, Keanu made a spontaneous decision to stop by a McDonald's. He craved the comfort of a casual, unassuming meal amidst the lively hum of everyday life. It was a sunny Sunday afternoon, with golden light filtering through the windows and a soft breeze carrying the energy of the city. The restaurant was alive with the cheerful chaos of families enjoying their meals. The air was thick with the enticing aroma of fries and burgers, blending seamlessly with the laughter of children and the rhythmic calls of orders from behind the counter. Keanu, dressed in a simple black t-shirt and sunglasses, chose a quiet corner to settle into. He placed his phone on silent, relishing the anonymity this moment afforded him. For a man constantly in the spotlight, this was a rare chance to simply exist without the weight of public expectations. He watched the ebb and flow of the restaurant with a calm smile, taking comfort in the unfiltered snapshots of ordinary lives around him. His peaceful moment, however, didn't last long. A small boy sitting at a nearby table caught Keanu's attention. The boy, no older than 5, had messy blonde hair and wore a slightly faded blue shirt that seemed a size too big for him. Clutched tightly in his small hands was a broken toy car, its once bright paint chipped and scratched. The boy's wide, curious eyes darted between Keanu and his toy, as if weighing whether to approach. Despite his young age, there was a palpable mix of hesitation and determination in his demeanor. Keanu's gaze softened as he noticed the boy's subtle movements. Finding the scene both heartwarming and intriguing, Keanu offered a gentle smile, hoping to ease the boy's apprehension. For a brief moment, the boy seemed to draw courage from that smile, his grip on the toy tightening. But instead of making a move, he retreated into his chair, as if debating whether to take the next step. Keanu returned to his meal, letting the boy take his time. Yet, the actor could feel the weight of the child's gaze lingering, pulling at the edges of his attention. At the same table as the boy sat a man who exuded an air of cold authority, dressed in a sharp suit that seemed out of place in the casual atmosphere of the restaurant. He was engrossed in a phone call. His rigid posture and sharp glances at the boy betrayed his impatience. Every time the boy shifted or fidgeted, the man shot him a look of disapproval, as though even the smallest movement was a nuisance. The tension between the two was unmistakable, and Keanu couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. Something about the dynamic didn't sit right with him. Minutes passed, and the boy's restlessness only grew. Finally, as if reaching a breaking point, he slid off his chair. His movements were tentative, his small feet barely making a sound on the tiled floor. He held his broken toy car tightly against his chest, as though it were a shield protecting him from the world. With cautious steps, he began to make his way toward Keanu. The restaurant, once filled with the noise of happy chatter, seemed to quiet around them. It was as if the world had paused, holding its breath to see what would happen next. Keanu noticed the boy approaching and set his burger down. Turning to face him fully, he leaned forward slightly, his posture open and inviting. When the boy finally reached his chair, he stopped, his wide eyes meeting Keanu's. Up close, Keanu could see the faint traces of fear and determination etched into the boy's expression. The boy leaned in, his small body trembling as he whispered something so softly that Keanu had to lean closer to hear. The words that reached Keanu's ears made his heart stop. His expression shifted from gentle curiosity to quiet concern. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, the man at the boy's table abruptly ended his phone call. Noticing the boy's absence, the man's eyes locked onto the scene unfolding between the boy and Keanu. Something in his gaze sent a chill down Keanu's spine, a cold, calculated anger simmering beneath the surface. The man stood, adjusting his suit jacket with deliberate movements as he began walking toward them. His steps were measured, but his presence felt like a storm building on the horizon. Keanu straightened in his chair, his calm demeanor unshaken but his instincts on high alert. As the man approached, He forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Sorry about this," he said in a voice that was smooth but devoid of warmth. "Ethan can be overly curious. I hope he's not bothering you." Keanu's gaze didn't waver. "Not at all," he replied evenly. "He was just showing me his toy car. It seems very important to him." The man's smile tightened. "Yes, he's quite attached to it, but we really should be going. Come on, Ethan," he said, extending a hand toward the boy. Ethan, however, didn't move. Instead, he took a small step back, inching closer to Keanu. The gesture was subtle but spoke volumes. Keanu's protective instincts flared, and he placed a reassuring hand on Ethan's shoulder. "It seems like Ethan has something he needs to say. Maybe we should give him a moment." The man's expression hardened, his polite facade beginning to crack. Before he could respond, a waitress who had been observing the interaction stepped in. "Is everything okay here?" she asked, her tone cautious as she glanced between Keanu and the man. Keanu seized the opportunity to discreetly pull out his phone, typing a quick message. He didn't know exactly what was happening, but he trusted his instincts, and they were telling him that this boy needed help. At the same table, a sharply dressed man sat absorbed in his phone. His suit was pristine, the kind of tailored perfection that commanded attention. Everything about him, from his rigid posture to his calculated demeanor, exuded authority. Yet, there was an edge to his presence, something in the way he carried himself that felt cold and unyielding. His sharp, disapproving glances at the small boy beside him revealed a distinct lack of patience, as if the child's every move was a disruption to his carefully curated composure. The stark contrast between the man's controlled intensity and the boy's timid vulnerability was striking, a dynamic that didn't escape Keanu's notice. Years of observing people, both on screen and off, had sharpened Keanu's instincts. He had learned to read between the lines of human behavior, picking up on the subtleties of unspoken emotions. Something about this scene felt off, like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this situation than met the eye. Keanu continued to eat, his gaze occasionally drifting toward the boy, who sat clutching his broken toy car like it was the most precious thing he owned. The boy's wide eyes flickered between Keanu and the man, as if torn between fear and a fragile sliver of courage. Minutes passed, each one marked by the boy's growing restlessness. His small hands tightened around the toy car, knuckles turning white with the force of his grip. Finally, as though he could no longer contain himself, the boy slid off his chair. His movements were hesitant, each step taken with visible trepidation. He glanced back at the man, who was still engrossed in his phone, then turned his gaze forward and began walking toward Keanu. The child's face was a mosaic of emotions: fear, hope, and determination mingling in his wide eyes. It was a look that struck Keanu deeply, stirring a quiet resolve within him. Keanu set his burger down, his attention now fully on the boy. He leaned forward slightly, his body language open and inviting. The lively hum of the restaurant seemed to fade into the background as the boy reached Keanu's chair and stopped. Up close, Keanu could see the faint tremor in the child's hands and the subtle quiver of his lip. The boy hesitated, his small chest rising and falling rapidly as though gathering the last remnants of his courage. Finally, he leaned in close, his voice barely above a whisper. Keanu bent down to listen, his calm expression masking the concern growing in his chest. The boy's words were so soft that Keanu had to strain to hear them. But when he did, his heart stopped for a moment. The weight of what the boy said hit him like a tidal wave, leaving him momentarily stunned. Keanu's mind raced as he processed the child's plea. Before he could respond, movement from the boy's table drew his attention. The man in the suit, who had previously been fixated on his phone, suddenly stood. His movements were deliberate, each step measured as he approached. The man's face was a mask of irritation barely concealed by a forced smile. There was a sharpness in his gaze, an unspoken warning that made the hairs on the back of Keanu's neck stand on end. Despite the tension emanating from the man, Keanu remained composed, his calm demeanor unwavering. "Sorry about this," the man said, his tone polite but laced with insincerity. His eyes flicked to the boy before settling on Keanu. "Ethan can be overly curious. I hope he hasn't been bothering you." Keanu met the man's gaze with a steady calmness, his instincts telling him to tread carefully. "Not at all," he replied, his voice even. "He was just showing me his toy car. It seems very important to him." The man's smile tightened, the strain in his expression becoming more apparent. "Yes, he's quite attached to it," he said, his tone clipped. "But we really should be going. Come on, Ethan." He extended a hand toward the boy, the gesture more commanding than inviting. Ethan didn't move. Instead, he took a small step back, positioning himself closer to Keanu. The child's silent plea for protection was clear, and Keanu felt a surge of determination rise within him. He placed a reassuring hand on Ethan's shoulder, his voice calm but firm. "It seems like Ethan has something he needs to say. Maybe we should give him a moment." The man's eyes narrowed slightly, the cracks in his facade beginning to show. "I appreciate your kindness," he said, his voice now carrying a faint edge of irritation. "But we're in a hurry." Before the man could reach for Ethan, a waitress who had been observing the scene stepped forward. Her presence was unassuming, but there was a quiet determination in the way she held herself. "Is everything okay here?" she asked, her tone careful as she looked between Keanu and the man. Keanu took the opportunity to discreetly pull out his phone, his fingers moving quickly to send a message. He didn't know the full extent of what was happening, but his instinct screamed that this boy needed help. He glanced down at Ethan, offering him a small, reassuring smile. "It's okay," he said softly. "You're safe now." Ethan's eyes filled with tears, but he stood his ground, drawing strength from Keanu's presence. The man's patience was visibly wearing thin, his forced smile now completely gone. "I don't know what you think you're doing," he said, his voice low and threatening, "but this has gone far enough." Keanu's calm demeanor remained steady as he addressed the sharply dressed man before him. "Not at all," Keanu said, his voice soothing yet firm, accompanied by a gentle smile. "Ethan was just showing me his toy car. It seems very important to him." The man, who now introduced himself as Mr. Harris, extended a hand toward the boy. His expression was tight, his forced politeness doing little to mask the irritation simmering beneath the surface. "Come on, Ethan," Harris said, his voice clipped. "It's time for us to go." But instead of moving, Ethan hesitated. His small frame seemed to shrink as he took a tentative step back, positioning himself slightly behind Keanu. The child's silent plea for protection was evident, and it struck a deep chord in Keanu. Without hesitation, Keanu placed a reassuring hand on Ethan's shoulder, his calm yet protective stance a quiet but firm declaration. "It seems like Ethan has something he wants to share," Keanu said evenly, maintaining his composed demeanor. "Maybe we can give him a moment." Harris's smile faltered, the tension in his jaw becoming more pronounced. "I appreciate your kindness," he said, his tone carrying an edge of impatience. "But we're in a hurry." Before Harris could make a move to retrieve the boy, a waitress who had been quietly observing the scene stepped forward. Her approach was careful, but the concern etched on her face was unmistakable. "Is everything okay here?" she asked, her voice steady but tinged with suspicion as she cast a wary glance at Harris. The interruption gave Keanu the opening he needed. Moving with the same quiet confidence that defined him, he discreetly reached for his phone under the table. His fingers moved swiftly across the screen as he typed out a message, his instincts urging him to act. Whatever was unfolding here, it was clear to him that Ethan's unspoken cry for help couldn't be ignored. Harris's patience was visibly fraying. The cracks in his polished exterior became more apparent as he shifted his weight and exhaled sharply. "I don't know what you think you're doing," he said, his voice dropping to a firmer, more confrontational tone. "But this has gone far enough." Keanu met Harris's piercing gaze with unwavering calm. "I'm just listening to someone who seems like they need to be heard," he replied, his tone neutral but firm. "I'm sure you can understand the importance of that." The tension between the two men was palpable, drawing the attention of other customers. A quiet murmur began to ripple through the restaurant as patrons exchanged curious glances. Keanu remained focused, his protective stance over Ethan unshaken. Ethan, still clutching his broken toy car, took another small step closer to Keanu. His wide eyes darted nervously between Harris and Keanu, his tiny hands trembling slightly as he held on to his only source of comfort. Keanu glanced down at the boy, offering a small, reassuring smile. "It's okay," he said softly. His voice meant only for Ethan. "You're safe now." Harris's composure finally began to unravel. His polite facade had entirely disappeared, replaced by an expression of barely concealed frustration. "You're overstepping," he hissed, leaning in slightly as if to intimidate Keanu. "This is none of your business." Keanu didn't flinch. Years of experience, both as an actor and as someone who had seen his fair share of confrontations, had prepared him for moments like this. "It becomes everyone's business when a child is scared," he said evenly, his voice steady but carrying an unmistakable weight. "I'm just trying to help." Before the situation could escalate further, the waitress reappeared. This time, she carried a tray with a folded napkin placed conspicuously on top. As she set the tray down on Keanu's table, she gave him a subtle nod. Keanu unfolded the napkin, revealing a handwritten note. "Police on their way." Relief washed over Keanu, but he remained outwardly calm. He turned his attention back to Ethan, crouching slightly to meet the boy's gaze. "Ethan," he said gently, "you're very brave. Do you want to tell me what's going on?" Ethan hesitated, his small hands fidgeting with the edges of his broken toy car. His gaze flickered toward Harris, who now stood rigid, his expression a storm of barely contained anger. Finally, Ethan spoke, his voice trembling but resolute. He did something bad to my mom. She's hurt." The boy's words hit Keanu like a punch to the gut. He felt a surge of protectiveness surge through him, his resolve hardening. "It's okay," Keanu said softly, his voice a balm to the boy's evident fear. "We're going to make sure she's safe." Harris's patience snapped. "This is ridiculous," he exclaimed, his voice rising enough to draw more attention. "He's just a child with a wild imagination. You have no right to interfere." Before Keanu could respond, the sound of sirens cut through the air, growing louder with each passing second. Harris's face blanched, his bravado faltering as he realized the gravity of the situation. Moments later, 2 uniformed police officers entered the restaurant, their presence immediately commanding the room's attention. Keanu stood tall, his hands still resting protectively on Ethan's shoulder. "Officers," he began, his voice calm but firm. "This boy needs help. He says his mother is hurt, and I believe him." The officers exchanged a glance before one of them, a woman with a steady gaze and a kind demeanor, crouched down to Ethan's level. "Hi there," she said softly. "Can you tell me your name?" Ethan's voice was barely above a whisper, but he managed to answer. "Ethan," he said. The officer offered him a reassuring smile. "Okay, Ethan, you're very brave for speaking up. We're here to help." She stood and turned to Harris, her expression hardening. "Sir, we're going to need to ask you some questions." Harris's demeanor shifted again, his face darkening as he realized he was no longer in control. As the officers began their inquiry, Keanu knelt beside Ethan once more. "You're safe now," he said quietly, his words a promise. "We're going to make sure everything is okay." Keanu's calm resolve never wavered as he stood his ground against the mounting tension. "I'm just listening to a boy who seems like he needs someone to hear him," he said, his voice steady but resolute. "I'm sure you can understand how important that is." Ethan, still clutching his broken toy car, finally summoned the courage to speak. His voice was barely above a whisper, but the words that escaped his lips carried the weight of his fear and desperation. "I don't want to go. Please. Can I stay here?" The atmosphere in the restaurant seemed to shift as his words hung in the air. Harris's forced smile vanished in an instant, replaced by a cold, calculating glare. His composed facade was crumbling, and for a moment, the tension was palpable. Harris opened his mouth to respond, but before he could utter a word, the glass doors of the restaurant swung open, and 2 uniformed police officers stepped inside. The officers, Ramirez and Vega, moved with purpose, their sharp eyes scanning the room before locking onto the scene unfolding at the table. Their presence immediately commanded attention, and the murmur of conversations in the restaurant faded into silence. The waitress who had been keeping a watchful eye on the situation approached them, pointing discreetly toward Keanu, Ethan, and Harris. Harris's demeanor shifted again as he attempted to regain control of the narrative. He straightened his posture, smoothing his suit jacket, and adopted a tone of polite indignation. "Officers, I'm glad you're here. There's been a misunderstanding. This is my son, Ethan, and we were just about to leave. I'm not sure why anyone thought there was an issue." But Keanu, calm and composed, wasn't about to let Harris's words overshadow the truth. He turned to the officers, his tone steady but urgent. "Officers, I think you should hear what Ethan has to say. He's scared, and I believe he's trying to tell us something important." Ramirez, a tall man with a firm but approachable demeanor, stepped forward, his eyes shifting between Harris, Keanu, and Ethan. Vega, a woman with kind eyes and a calm presence, knelt down to Ethan's level, her voice soft and reassuring. "Hi there, sweetheart. My name's Officer Vega. Can you tell me your name?" Ethan hesitated, his small hands trembling as he gripped his toy car even tighter. He looked up at Keanu, who gave him an encouraging nod and a gentle squeeze on the shoulder. Drawing a shaky breath, Ethan finally answered, "Ethan." Vega offered him a warm smile. "That's a very nice name. Ethan, can you tell me what's going on? We're here to help you." The boy's gaze darted toward Harris, who was now glaring at him, his expression dark and threatening. Ethan's voice trembled as he began to speak. He hurt my mom. She's at home, and she can't get up." The room fell into a stunned silence, the weight of Ethan's words sinking in. Ramirez exchanged a glance with Vega, their unspoken understanding clear. Vega reached out to Ethan, her voice gentle. "Thank you for telling us that. Ethan, you're very brave." Harris's calm veneer shattered completely, his face flushed with anger as he stepped forward, his voice rising in protest. "This is absurd. He's just a child with an overactive imagination. You can't seriously believe him over me. I'm his father." Ramirez moved swiftly, placing a firm hand on Harris's chest to stop him from advancing further. "Sir, we're going to need you to stay right where you are. We'll be asking you some questions in a moment." Harris's eyes burned with fury as he glared at the officer, but he reluctantly stepped back, muttering under his breath. Meanwhile, Vega continued to speak with Ethan, her kind tone unwavering. "Ethan, do you know if your mom is hurt very badly? Can you tell us where she is?" Ethan nodded timidly, his voice barely audible. "She's at home. She said she'd be okay, but she couldn't get up." Keanu crouched down beside the boy, his steady presence a source of comfort. "Ethan, you're doing so well," he said softly. "The officers are going to help your mom. Okay, everything's going to be all right." Harris, growing more agitated by the second, attempted to interject. "This is ridiculous. You have no evidence of anything. He's making this up. My lawyer will have a field day with this nonsense." But Ramirez wasn't swayed. "Sir, we're going to investigate the situation. For now, we need you to remain here while we verify Ethan's statement." Vega stood, addressing Keanu. "Can you stay with Ethan for a moment while we sort this out?" Keanu nodded without hesitation. "Of course." He turned back to Ethan, offering a reassuring smile. "You're safe now. We're going to make sure everything's okay." As the officers began to take control of the situation, the tension in the restaurant started to ease. Customers who had been watching the exchange whispered among themselves, their curiosity mingled with concern. Harris stood rigid, his anger barely contained as he glared at Keanu and the officers. Keanu stayed close to Ethan, his presence a protective shield for the frightened boy. He knew this was just the beginning, but he was determined to see it through. Whatever it took, he would make sure Ethan and his mother got the help they needed. Ethan looked up at Officer Vega with wide, uncertain eyes. Her gentle tone encouraged him, and after a moment of hesitation, he nodded timidly. "But the door is locked," he murmured. "I don't know how to get in." Keanu knelt beside him, placing a steady hand on the boy's small shoulder. "Don't worry," Keanu said softly, his voice reassuring. "We'll figure it out together. You're not alone in this." The officers moved quickly, escorting Harris outside and securing him in the back of a patrol car. His demeanor had shifted from smug confidence to barely concealed rage, and he muttered under his breath as they led him away. Ramirez shut the car door firmly, exchanging a look with Vega. "We'll need to act fast," he said. Vega nodded, gesturing toward Keanu and Ethan. "Let's get to the house." The drive to Ethan's home was tense. Keanu sat beside Ethan in the back seat, offering quiet words of comfort as the boy clutched his repaired toy car tightly. "You've been so brave today," Keanu told him. "Just a little longer, and we'll make sure your mom is safe." Ethan nodded, his grip on the toy tightening as the car approached his street. When they arrived, the scene that greeted them was grim. The front door was slightly ajar, creaking ominously as Ramirez pushed it open. The interior of the house bore clear signs of a violent struggle. Furniture was overturned, shattered glass glittered on the floor, and the room carried an eerie stillness. Vega and Ramirez moved cautiously, their hands hovering near their holstered weapons as they cleared the house. In the living room, they found Ethan's mother, Sarah, lying unconscious on the floor. Her breathing was shallow, but she was alive. A small cut on her forehead hinted at the violence she had endured. Vega immediately called for paramedics while Ramirez scanned the rest of the house for any additional threats. Keanu stayed with Ethan, gently guiding him away from the chaotic scene. "She's going to be okay," Keanu reassured him. "The paramedics are on their way." The arrival of the paramedics brought a flurry of activity. They worked quickly to stabilize Sarah, carefully lifting her onto a stretcher and preparing to transport her to the hospital. As they did, Ramirez returned from his search of the house, holding a small notebook he had found in Harris's belongings. His expression was grim as he showed it to Vega. Inside were detailed notes and plans, chilling evidence of Harris's intent to abduct Ethan and flee to another state. The officers exchanged a knowing glance, their resolve to protect Ethan and his mother hardening. Keanu remained by Ethan's side throughout the ordeal, his quiet presence a source of strength for the frightened boy. As the paramedics carried Sarah out of the house, Ethan's gaze followed her, his small face a mixture of relief and lingering fear. Keanu crouched down beside him, his tone gentle but firm. "You did the right thing, Ethan," he said. "Because of you, your mom is getting the help she needs. You were so brave to speak up." At the hospital, as Sarah began to regain consciousness, her first words were a faint call for Ethan. Keanu gently guided the boy to her bedside, staying back to give them a moment. Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she reached for her son, pulling him into a fragile but heartfelt embrace. "You saved us," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "Thank you." Keanu, standing nearby, shook his head humbly. "Ethan is the hero here," he said, his voice warm. He had the courage to ask for help when it mattered most. That's not easy to do. The days that followed were a whirlwind of recovery and rebuilding. Sarah's injuries, though painful, were not life-threatening, and she was discharged from the hospital within a few days. Keanu ensured that she and Ethan were connected with resources and support, including counseling and a safe place to stay. But he didn't stop there. The experience left a profound impact on him, inspiring him to take action beyond this single incident. Keanu began working with local organizations dedicated to helping victims of domestic violence, using his platform to raise awareness and provide financial assistance. Months later, Ethan was honored at a special ceremony organized by the local police department. The event celebrated his bravery and quick thinking, recognizing him as a young hero who had saved not only his mother but also himself. The room was filled with applause as Ethan stepped onto the stage, clutching a small drawing he had made as a thank you gift. In the picture, a boy and a man stood side by side, holding hands. Above them, in bright, colorful letters, were the words, "My hero." As Ethan handed the drawing to Keanu, the actor knelt to accept it, his eyes filled with genuine pride and emotion. "Ethan," he said, his voice steady but thick with feeling, "you showed the world what true courage looks like. Asking for help takes a kind of bravery that not everyone has. I'm so proud of you." The audience erupted into applause once more. But for Keanu, the most meaningful moment was the quiet smile on Ethan's face. It was a smile that spoke of hope, resilience, and the power of standing up for what is right. For Keanu, this wasn't just a story of heroism. It was a reminder of the difference that kindness and compassion could make in even the darkest of times. As the applause subsided, Keanu stood beside Ethan, gently resting a hand on the boy's shoulder. The young hero's quiet strength shone brightly, and Keanu couldn't help but marvel at how such courage had come from someone so young. In that moment, he knew that Ethan's story would inspire others to speak up, to seek help, and to believe in the possibility of change. After the ceremony, Keanu stayed behind, speaking with attendees and thanking the local organizations that had stepped in to support Ethan and Sarah. He shared a few heartfelt words about the importance of building a community where people feel safe and supported, emphasizing that no one should have to face their struggles alone. His sincerity resonated deeply with everyone in the room, many of whom had been touched by similar stories of resilience and survival.